right, hey, hi, hello again. Happy Thanksgiving. It's me again. I wanted to show you some of the newest images that Dan has been creating with Project Dog Waffle. Can't tell if this is the Howler edition or the Artist edition. The Artist edition does not do animation, but these are still images, so definitely could be done with the $27 program. Currently on sale for a few more days, and that's the Thanksgiving promotion through Black Friday and all the way through Cyber Monday. So here are just a few images that we just added to the collection. In fact, there is also one thing we'll be adding. It's the height map in this layered format, LYR. In a layered format, it's essentially the dog waffle layer system, and in this case, I'll double click it to open it. You'll see there's only the main image. There's not really an additional stack of layers in this particular file. Just one main image, and usually also a second image in the swap, and the swap buffer or the swap image. You'll see that if you go here to S, to bring it or jump to the swap image, and there it is. So these are the colors that are mapped on it, and this is the elevation map, right? So now what's the dimension on this one? It's probably at 1280 something. Let's see, image info. Let's see what we have here. Oh, even bigger, 2048. So slightly larger here. We can go all the way to 8K. We've done some renderings on 8K images, 8K by 8K. That's 8192, I think, by 8192 pixels. So one thing I wanted to do is show how we can also use an elevation map as the additional cloud system, right? Because if I have just those two images, first of all, I'm going to store this one, and I'm also going to go switch to the swap image and store that one. So we have a stored copy of either one of those, because we may want to take it further and to do some more games with this. And one thing I'd like to do is, let's see, go here. Why did I add a second one of that? Okay, there you go. So we have the swap in the swap image in the main image. And one thing I could do here is add a bit of erosion to that. You can see there's already some gullies, right? You see a little bit of darker trails here. These are erosion markers, right? So we used the erosion filter to figure out where the slopes are and where some material might get eroded. And the bright parts you want to imagine are the high crests, the high peaks of the mountains, and then so these eroded gullies kind of gather down in the valley at the bottom. And they're not very pronounced. They're very subtle, but it's good enough to actually see a nice rendering in 3D with those erosions. We might, however, want to add more to it. So there's a couple of ways to do that. If the image is not too big, you can probably load it into 3D Designer. Let's go to Transform 3D Designer. And if that crashes, then we know it was too big, and it doesn't, so we know it's good. This might be a Martian landscape near Olympus Mons. It might not. It's just imagination going free and rampant. We can adjust the size a little bit. There you go. A bit more like a canyon land. And you can see here those erosions. So if you click on the More button to see more options, you'll see you can add more erosion to that. You can change the amount of rainfall, just very little or a lot of it. And then also the length, the maximum length of these. Let's make it 3. I think that's about the maximum where it's really mattering. The flatness threshold. So that one will allow you to see a little bit more of potholes, if you want to call them that. It's basically going to give free range to do erosion damage in areas where it might only be subtle. So there you see here now it's got much more of that. The viscosity of the fluid, the water, has a viscosity level, and you can also fiddle with that to perhaps say, no, you know what, it's very saline, it's not even water, maybe it's goo, maybe it's just something not so fluid. And so if you do that, let's say if we reduce it to 55 instead of 255, it's probably going to show less erosion. Yeah, you see that? Very different. All right, and there's also sediments, right? Where all this material goes away, we want to pretend it's being collected in the valleys, so we have sediment deposits here too, right? And so that's another interesting one to play with, especially when you have these here, those abyss, like a peak or a sudden fall, and like the wall or something like that. You could definitely imagine seeing some sediments adding some nice uh, perspective to that. Because when it's no sediments there, it's just a wall and nothing there to catch you. But if you have a bit of sediments, it looks more like there is some material that came off that wall. Avalanches, stuff like that, rockfall, and then you see it fill up in some areas. Now you can also adjust the amount here. There's a little bit of fine tuning you'll want to do. And if you want to see it with the coloration, just switch from object color to swap image. So the coloration comes from the swap image. And if you don't like the way it's currently looking, you can certainly change that to recreate a new texture. I'll just keep it here for now, but you could also reduce the where the snowfall is if you wanted to add some snowfall. We'll do that separately in another one. The important thing is to keep the resulting height map, right? So if you look at the image here is controlling the color as well. So the higher it is, the brighter it is. That's exactly what that's all about. The other thing you can do is simply ignore have just one object color, right? If you want to give it something like an earthly color, something like this. There you go. The whole point is that what really matters right now for me is not so much the color that's going to be mapped onto it, but rather just the elevation itself, the elevation map. And so I want to adjust this to a level that I feel comfortable with, and then actually store the erosion map. So there's an option here called Store Erosion. And when you do that, you'll see the erosion map here. You can also store the resulting height map. I certainly recommended that too. And if you wanted to, you could also have some lighting effects or shadows. So let's say you take the light source here and add some ray traced soft shadows, and perhaps place it away. That's the altitude. That's the zenith needs to be. There you go. So now we have very strong sunset lighting, if you will, coming from the side. And as you rotate it, you see the shadows turn around with it. You might want to simulate the presence of a little bit of an atmospheric glow as well, so increase another light. That one here is typically put at high altitude to go way above, and then add a bit of a bluish tint, or if it's a sunset, maybe a reddish tint. And here you go, give it a bit more of a reddish tone, and let it influence that coloration there too. But again, that's not changing the elevation map. It does, however, affect the appearance overall. The lighting is very important. We could do some ground fog, maybe a non-linear ground fog that comes in like that. This one's dark. The fog color can be changed. Instead of a background being dark, you could make it like a light blue. And so then at that point, you have more of a foggy ground there. So a lot of other things that can be stored as well here. Save the Z buffer depth, the distance, if you want to do anything like filters that go based on the distance, so that we can do bokeh blur or Gaussian blur or some other effects based on the distance, so that only certain regions will be affected by your filters. There's a lot more to it too. There is the texture can be stored. Of course, it's still in the swap image too, so we don't really need to. But if you made changes to the texture, to the color, you could store it right there. And then there is also an alpha equals z. So we take the height map, or the distance actually here, I think, and map that into the alpha channel, so it becomes sort of a mask that is queued to the distance. And there's even an option to save this as a wavefront OBJ file with some options and colors and formats and other things. I'll skip that for now, but that's an option, and you can explore that if you have a 3D program that reads OBJ files nicely. You can do that actually with even with 2D programs. Photoshop, for instance, has a 3D pipeline. You can take this out from here. All right, so masks also. And lightning. So the masks are essentially indicating the distance. Based on the elevation from the coloration here, we have snow level, rock, and grass. If we used this, then there would be a mask indicating where those different regions are placed across the surface. There are 3 masks actually for those 3 different regions. There's also the lighting. So we have 2 lighting maps. I'm going to store those so we can see them. And there you go. Let's go and cancel out of this. We did store everything we want. Here are the lighting maps. So one of them is from the second light, which I gave it a reddish color. Right, so that one was placed high above, and you can see it basically. That's the one that doesn't cast shadows, but it's giving you an easy way to create sort of ambient lighting. There is this one here, which does have the light source from the side and casts shadows. So that one, you could basically use these to bake them into the elevation map. Right. So for instance, I'm going to go minimize this one. I may not have a need for this one, so let's go minimize that. But this one here might be interesting too, because you do see where the gullies are, and you might use this in a multiply mode or subtractive or additive or screen mode or some other modes. You might use that to combine it with the elevation map. Right. So let's go find our elevation map. There it was. And that's the new height map. You can see the erosion is much more visible now because we added a bit more to it. The original erosion was only this. This was the original map, and you can barely see those gullies. But the new one, see, that's the new one. And then here is actually the erosion map that I also stored and saved. So what I can do is actually use this again. Even stronger erosion can be had. So I can go back to this one where we have already a first level, and then simply subtract the erosion map here. Click on the little widget in the lower right corner and go to combine subtract. And so now anything that's white here will get subtracted from the image. And of course, that's a very strong subtraction. So we'll need to interactively undo this a little bit, slide it away to some extent so it's not too massive there in its impact. One thing you can also do is perhaps give it more of an old erosion look. When you think about this one here, if you blur this a little bit, something like even a box filter or a fast simple blur, just adding a little blur like that will keep it less crisp and sudden, and perhaps make it more soft eroded valleys, rolling hills, if you will. Let's do something like a Gaussian blur. Something like that. Right. And then another technique to do about the same thing in this case here is to actually use the Mystic, the light diffusion. Right. With the light diffusion, any bright pixels are allowed to branch out. And so you see now here there is a little bit of a channel around it, and gives it a second level of erosion. Make it perhaps a bit more precise. And so you have basically, you have the original path that you see here, the brighter part, but then there is a little medium gray level around it, and that makes it sort of a second depression level there. You have a little bit of a wider valley, and then a second valley with more recent erosion in the very middle. So that can be very interesting as well. And so what we'll do is we'll use this, we'll store this one. Here it is. Again, to see the difference, we see this was the original, very crisp, if you will. Like in some cases, you see either just the white here, but then just the black next to it. And then with this one, we have more subdued transitions. And if there is anyone that was standing free, you might see it if you increase the contrast. You might see it better that way. Here, let's go to the filter to add some contrast. There you go. So you can probably just see how some of that is going to be. Yeah, here we can see how it kind of has a much wider range around the central river or gully, if you want to call it that. All right, so let's in fact use something in between the two, something like this, and then so I'm going to store that. You see how that works with the workflow. It's really nice to have. It's good to have a big screen, by the way, high resolution, because you're going to start amassing these little items, or have a second screen even where you can move this over. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this elevation map and then subtract this one. All right, so you go to combine and subtract, and use the interactive undo to subtract only a little bit. But now you have some extra deeper valleys, much more rounded, soft edges, and those crevices are not so cutting in so suddenly. And you can further avoid that, further blur it or blend it a little bit by using that photographic filter again afterwards, after combining it, right? Here's the light diffusion, and do some more of that, right? So anytime you do that, it will tend to remove some of the sudden small noise or high frequency details and give it a bit more soft rolling hills appearance, or like an old eroded field with not much new what's the right word? Nothing to cut your knee on if you walk and stumble. Right? It's just very soft, rounded surfaces. And in fact, it's time to check that theory. So let's go and oh wait, no, there's one more thing, right? I wanted to also combine this dude here. So we can do the same here. We can subtract this or combine it somehow, maybe with screen mode. There you go. That looks interesting. Again, maybe not too harsh, so let's go and undo that a little bit. But you see how we can combine even very different images. You could combine. Here, it's always nice to have something that looks a little bit more correlated than different. And so I'm going to store this one as my new elevation map. It does have a little bit of coloration now since I combined it with a color. Most likely it has a little bit of a reddish tone. And one way to test that, of course, is to go to the hue saturation value filter. In the hue saturation value, you can increase the saturation, and you'll see also it changes to a blue or purple or green here. So yeah, there's definitely some saturation, some coloration there. If you don't like that, what you do is you turn it back into a grayscale. Go to the image menu, and on the grayscale, pick one of those, or even the color filter, and find your way to the perfect contrast level. Perhaps even, in fact, when it's grayscale, it's a nice way to stretch it from white to black, right? If there are pixels that are dark but not quite black, and there is no total 0, 0 RGB value anywhere here, that will make it so. That will, if you expand the dynamic range, you will have it go from black to white. The brightest pixel here is white. Somewhere around here there is a pixel with 255 on red, green, and blue. All right, so I'm gonna go and store this. Let's go and minimize those. We probably don't need them, but it's good to hang around and keep them for a little bit. Let's go minimize this. No, actually, I want to minimize these guys. That's the texture map. We still want to work on that one too. So let's go do that. We have it in a swap image here, but I'm going to work on it here. I'm going to say, let's see what else we could do with that. Actually, what we want to do with that is based on the elevation map. So I'm going to start with the elevation map and create a new color map that is from the stylize. We have, you notice there is an erosion filter here too, by the way. All right, so if you don't go into the 3D designer, but you need an erosion filter, you can do that from right here and add more erosion to it, just the way we did earlier, but we did it from the 3D designer. So you have the flatness threshold, viscosity, run length, and the amount of rainfall. And you can invert the shape if you will. But the whole thing is already done for when it comes to that erosion. What we do need next is the coloration. So we can also use this filter. Stylize, slope shading, right? That's going to add some coloration. We call that a shader or shading. It's going to add it based on the slope, but not only the slope, also the elevation. So you can set the margin for where the snow is, something like this. You can grow the vegetation up on higher ground, or you can have in between the rocky gray, or maybe a brownish tint to it. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, so we have some other type of elevation map here. We have some shading options. We go to Sobel. Okay, so let's use this and combine it with the other. So I'm going to store this one. And so now we have two texture maps. We got this one originally, and we have this one, and we'd like to kind of combine the two together. Now, one thing I'd like to do eventually is really slap this snowfall on top of this one, no matter what the color is underneath it. I need to somehow get this white stuff isolated so it doesn't get replaced or combined in a see-through mode. I want the snow to completely be opaque. So before it's too late, one thing I want to do is select that snow from the selection mask. Select by, I could go to the lights, the very brightest parts will be chosen, and that will include the snow, but it might also include other stuff. If you have some very bright sandy beaches, or if you have some white rock, some gypsum, some chalk, that's going to possibly get selected too. So lights is in a range of brightness that perhaps we don't care to pick altogether. So I'm going to go with the color key instead, where you have a little bit more choice to pick exactly what you want to choose here, and give it more tolerance or less, and also indicate whether you're looking for a particular hue. So you have a hue or saturation or a value difference. Right? So you can quite easily isolate that white fluff from the snowy range here, and pick that and store that. So we have a selection mask we can go back to for the snow. And really, you can do that for anything. You have slopes of gray rock, you have sandy flat beaches, you have green vegetation regions. Anything you want to isolate, you can do that and then store that selection. So you can always go back to reinstating that selection mask. Right? You can even paint on this. You can blur it. In fact, you can blur the selection mask directly. The currently installed selection mask, you might first of all want to not show the marching ants, because they tend to be a bit confusing or time-consuming for sure. Like here, if you zoom in here, you can see if the marching ants are enabled, it's quite a busy area. Actually, easier seen when you zoom out. But it's busy and has so many details, some of them selected, some of them not, and so much of it close together. It's going to take a while to keep this animated. So if you don't care to see this slow you down, simply go to the selection menu here and deselect the show marching ant. You do want the overlay, although that's optional too. You don't have to necessarily see that it's been selected, as long as you know what you've done and you know it's been selected. But the overlay is a nice clue or a cue to tell you that something is not selected. Right? And we care to see the white snow remains white. If the white snow was purple, it would mean it wasn't selected. Like for instance, if I invert the selection, now you see the white snow is not selected. There are some gray parts around it, and maybe we want to select them too. Right? So we can be a little bit more lenient about that. We can give it a bit more tolerance. Let's go re-invert it. Oh, actually, we have a copy here, so we can just replace it this way. And so if we want the snow region to be inclusive of these parts that are currently not selected, but they are pretty white or light gray as well, what you do is you simply go and blur that selection. From the selection menu, you can go and either use a Gaussian blur selection or a box filter selection. Box filter has an extra show alpha option, so you can actually see a grayscale image of the alpha channel that we are blurring in. And so that's one way to do that. The other way, maybe the Gaussian blur is a little bit more appropriate in this case, but be very careful. Only 1 or 2 pixels is what it takes, because I'm zoomed in a lot here, so it's only 1 or 2, maybe 3 pixels that I need. Let's go and precise. And so now we have also added a little bit of a transition. It's not such a crisp fade, crisp jump from selected to non-selected. It has a little bit of a transition, a sort of an easing, smooth easing into it or out of it. And if you wanted to simply grow it without or or in addition to that, if you wanted to grow that selected region, you can do that too. There's a grow selection. Right, so if you look at that, now the white part is growing, is gaining, even though it's not exactly white. This is the light gray area, but we can select that as well. And now we have less of the non-selected pink areas. Right, so the snow looks a little bit more dominant here. And then while we have that selection, we can in fact force it to white. Right? I mean, why not do that? Since we, like for instance, if we go and further grow that to the point where these pink areas are going away. So I'm going to go and grow it perhaps by another 5 or 6, something like that. Now all of that, or most of that, is selected, but it's not the white snow color. It's light gray, and some of that might even be a very different color. So what I want to do is really to show it a solid white cap there. I'm going to call it, I'm going to erase it to white, right? So erase the selected to white. So now this is very, very bright white. Might be a little bit too harsh, and so you might, or not enough, and you can do that again. So do that erase color again, select it to white. There you go. So it gets to be more and more saturated. You can also just paint over that, because when you paint, it tends to do it many times as your brush stroke goes over that, especially with the step distance being small. If you have a big step distance, it's not going to do it that badly. But let's say with the right button, I have white for the erase color. So if I paint over that, it should be adding a little bit of whiteness here. Perhaps if I add more opacity to the brush, and if I add more or reduce the step, something like this. Okay, but it's subtle because we have a selection mask working against it. Right? Still, you can see how it's kind of expanding or brightening the white colors just through that selection mask. Okay, and that's going to be useful if we want to have some whiteness in there. So let's see, perhaps a little bit more blur on the current selection. Let's do the Gaussian blur again, something like so. There you go, and then painting over that should definitely erode some of the non-snow regions. So now it's really heavy snowpack because the snow is basically going to cover it all. Right? You will not see fine details like erosions. Like see these guys here, those erosion gups, they're going to go away. It's all going to be filled by the snow, and you won't see much of that elevation change anymore. It's all filled up. And that's what the snow does. Kind of evens out, and small details go away, right? Well, up to a certain point, and then the avalanche takes it down, and everything changes. So, so we have a very bright snowpack here. We can even do that some more, once more here. Select erase to white, and then so at this point I can clear the selection. And I have my coloration for very snowy mountain peak here. Let's go store this and restore the elevation map. And so I want to put the color here, right? But I want to still see the original that we had earlier for some of the vegetation area. I just want the snowpack over here. And that's why we needed to really have the selection mask. Let me undo and see if we can go back to the selection mask. Let's store this selection mask. That's going to be a valuable asset. Where did I store it now? Sometimes I just got too many of them. That's the light. I don't need this one anymore. I think it's here. No, that's not it. Wait, did I store the elevation map or did I store something else? Maybe I didn't store the elevation map. There. So that's the selection mask. Let me store the selection. There it is. Okay. So here's my selection with the more dense snowpack. You can see between this one and this one. Right? You can store that. You can restore that in the selection mask in the alpha channel. or replace this one. So that's the one I want to use when I finally combine the snow on top of this mountain. Right, so let's go initially put this thing in here, and then simply go to put this mask in place, and then we can combine perhaps this stored copy of the color map. Let's see, combine in screen mode, right? But that's actually going to combine. You still see both through a little bit. Right? If we do that 2 or 3 times, that's fine. Or maybe if we put it in additive mode, it's going to make it much brighter wherever the white stuff is here. Or in fact, where you want to tell it, whenever it's bright, whenever it's greater than what's already there, show it. So that's probably going to just replace it. Right? That's kind of the equivalent to the replace mode for the bright stuff. So we can go like this. And it's probably not going to add any more to that. Well, the selection mask was still kind of subduing it, so yeah, it could a few more times before it's completely done. Then we can clear this, and now we have the snow cap on top of the unaffected region from the original. So the original texture. So I'm going to go minimize all this. I'm done with that. I'm going to go store this color map. Now we have the original texture plus the snow packs on top. And close those. And restore the elevation map and show it here. And oh, now I got it the wrong way. I'm actually looking at the main image. So this one should be here, and that one should go over here in the swap. So you see here in the title bar, the title menu shows Howler 11 and swap. All right, so we have this. Now there's one more thing that sometimes I'll do, and that's to combine this one with the texture itself, just to add a little bit more shadiness to it, like to show this is the colors. And because these colors are inside the valleys and the hills and the rocks and the cliffs and all that stuff, there's a bit of lighting that I can bake into it simply by combining the two. Right? If I show swap mixing, but with a mixing layer that is not too multiplicative, making it not too dark. Let's say if I show it in screen mode, now you can see that we have some coloration where the gullies are showing through as well. So it's a combination of the two layers together. Right? And so that's something that we can use to perhaps bake that into the colors as well. And so it looks even more intensely correlated, if that's the right word. So I'm going to go and make it the word, merge with swap. So we now have a single color containing mostly the colors from the texture map, but also a bit of a hint of the shaded areas. Think about it. If there is water coming down here, if it is a river, if it is a gully with some creek flowing through it, or just recently, maybe right after a rainy day, yeah, this is not the lighting effect. This is the darkening due to moisture, right? If it's wet, it's going to look darker. And so regardless of which way the light is shining from or on it, we may want to have that little extra coloration or discoloration due to some atmospheric condition that came down on it. All right, so that's the idea with this. We are in the swap image. Let's go back to the main image. I think these are the two images I want to keep. So I'm going to certainly save that, and you need to do that more often than I did here. But save often. And then when you do, make sure you check the format, the file type here. Don't keep it as a single image. I mean, yes, you want to do that too, like especially your final JPEG, or you save it out as a default target. Not this one. This target here is going to go through the converter. All of these, most of these formats, from the BMP to the TIFF, will go, and possibly even OpenEXR. All of these here will go through the converter that came with ImageMagick and is included with Dog Waffle. But if you want the native, the default target format, that one will be faster and easier to use. There is, of course, also an option under the file menu where you can find the general file converter. But there is definitely this one, the layered format. You should use this if you want that single image to contain both the elevation map and the swap image, texture map in the swap image, both of these in a single file. All right, so do that, and then wherever you want to save this, save it. In fact, I'm going to go to my folder for landscapes. Oops, that's too far. We should have it here somewhere. One more there. Come on, help me find it. Landscapes. There it is. Landscapes large. There you go. All right, so I'm going to save this one here. Landscape 25 was the name originally given to it. I'm going to call it the same plus. All right, so something 25 plus. And that's a fairly large image, right? Because it contains two images, and they are each at fairly high resolution, and we're not going to try to compress them. Disk space is cheap. SSD drives are fast. We don't need to compress much on that. We can, and we do in some cases. And if you go and use the general file converter for saving, you might see some of that compression. JPEG definitely is highly compressed and much smaller, but it's lossy. Here you don't want to introduce any more losses. On the image, the pixels should be the way they are and stay that way. And so now, of course, the fun stuff begins. This was just the homework, the prep work. Now we get to render this. Right, so we have PuppyRay GPU. And there will be one more thing we need, or we want. Well, there's a lot of things we want. But there's one more thing we'll get, and that is a different sky. Right now we have this default sky. Let me get rid of the water for now. No water here. And all we see is our beautiful landscape. And perhaps reduce the elevation a little bit. That's this one here with the left button down. Scale it down a tad bit. Add some pre-filter so it's a little bit more round, soft. And then let's see what else could we possibly want here. Oh, a little bit of global illumination. So the sky is actually shining on this. And we can increase the brightness. So it's not all dark on the shaded side. It's actually getting some light and a decent amount of it. And we can also increase the level, the distance for the fog. We can increase the zoom or reduce the zoom angle or increase the focal length. And so let's say we go something like this, but we also want to have a different sky. And so that's another part, another step. But you know what? Let's do that. Because the skies are available here. These are the presets. Right, so you have some preset skies here. And of course, if you look at the fog, it all disappears in the fog. It looks very similar. Not totally, though, because some of these are reddish. Like these two are very reddish. So they are going to be very different in not only what the sky looks like, but also what the terrain looks like, because it's getting predominantly a reddish tint now, right, or darker. Let's go back to the wide angle so we can see that sky a little bit better. There. This is of course very wide angle, and you might not want to keep it this way for your final render, but it's a good way, it's a good thing to do that when you are experimenting with the skies, trying to understand what's it going to look like when you actually have some of these northern lights in the sky, or some snowy whiteout conditions. So now let's create our own skies there. This sky image, we do have an option down here, which is a custom brush. Use a custom brush. Well, right now we don't have a custom brush loaded, so it's nothing going to be happening here. We have just our presets. And you could replace those presets. Oh, there's a starry sky one with a bit of a cloud combination with some stars. But the thing that I want to do is load our own sky, and in fact I'm going to use the very same thing as the elevation map here. All right, so how do we make this a perfect sky in the background? First of all, we need to change its dimensions. The sky is going to be a much wider because it's a 360 degrees, versus 90 degrees up and down. From the horizon to the pole above our heads, that's only 90 degrees, whereas all around us, looking left to right, full panoramic sweep, that's 360. So 90 degrees versus 360, that's a 1:4 ratio, or the other. It is 4 times wider than high, right, as an image representing the sky map. So what we do is we take this image and we fit it into a much larger image. Now this one's already a large one. You've got to be careful not to make it too big. All right, so one thing I'm going to do is pick this up as a custom brush, the entire image, and make sure it's seamless so I can tile it and replicate it a few times. So I'm going to go brush, make seamless, and maybe I want to overlap a little bit more, something like this. I don't need to have it seamless vertically, right? Because the bottom is going to be at the horizon and the top is going to be at the pole. I don't have to be seamless. It's nice to have a little bit so the pole doesn't look strange if you actually look at it. But who's going to look at the place right above the sky when you have a beautiful landscape to be explored down the horizon? So you probably won't see much of the vertical anomalies at the top of the pole, and the bottom we won't see because it's going to disappear in the fog. So don't really need much on the vertical side. I still sometimes keep a little bit, but what you do want is a good overlap on the horizontal, so you have just no way to detect where that transition was, and it is very seamless there. So that's in the brush now. Let's store that. Store and manage the copy. We don't need it as big. What we do need is the image that's going to hold the sky and replicate this a few times. We need that image to be much wider, right? 4:1, the ratio. So we're going to go and change the ratio here. Let's go resample the current image and make it 4K by 1K. Now, I know there's going to be the purist that says that that's not 1K. 1K is 1024. So let's give you that, okay? I'm a mathematician myself at heart. So 496, that's 4K by 1K. And let's keep it that way. So now we have a fairly large image. And because we resampled, hold on, let me disable the preview on the brush. Because we resampled it, not only did we resample the front, but also the swap image. So that one got there too. Doesn't matter, we don't care about that right now. We will later restore the original image anyway, but right now we're working on the image that will represent the sky, and that's how it looks, right? It needs to be some units up vertically, and then 4 times that same number of units horizontally, so that we can wrap this around like a cylindrical wrap around us. And then the top part is going to get to the poles. And so what we do at this point is we either just use it this way, or even better, we use the brush and perhaps preview it so we can see it. And we use this brush and tile it several times so we have the details even finer, because without it, right now we have squeezed or stretched these clouds a little bit too far, I would say. And it might look better if we actually keep them finer. So I'm going to go to the brush where I have that same image without the stretch. And I can make it fit a little bit better. I know vertical dimension should be exactly 1024, so I can go to the brush and resample right there. And the brush image right now is bigger. You can see the box here. If you make it smaller, you'll see this fit exactly here. Just give it 1024 and you'll be spot on. And then the horizontal ends up being 1223. You might make it 1224, and it's still, the height is still 1024. So that's good. It's usually better to work with odd numbers, with even numbers. But it doesn't matter so much. In fact, you could even keep it a little bit bigger, so there's a bit of safe margin. Let's go maybe 75, 78, 80%, something like that. So that's good enough. Now the brush is a little bit finer, and we can tile it. One here, we can tile it, one here, we can tile it. But that's going to be difficult to do precisely and not see a gap. You notice how there was a gap here. Oh wait, no, I didn't actually tile it. But still, even if you do, yeah, see now I have it because there's a little bit of a margin. I end up going sometimes a little bit higher. I will need to zoom in and really make sure that my connecting rivers are matching side by side. So that's doable, but it's not my favorite way to save time. So what I'll do instead is I'll tile it. Right? I'll simply use the fill tool. I'll go and clear this, and then I'll use the fill tool. Fill as in Philip? No. It's still a nice name. And I'm going to go to the fill settings and say I want to use the pattern fill. And here's the pattern right now. It's the custom brush anyway. Right? So whatever pattern you choose, if you pick one of these patterns, let's say this one here, you can see it gets replicated. It's a very big pattern actually, but it gets filled here. And then so if you use the fill tool, maybe with the image Q command, where's the fill, the Q, shortcut Q, it gets filled in here. It's just a very big image, so it's not exactly useful right now. I think if I look at the resample of the brush, it's a very large image. Oh, and I need to set the mode to pattern fill. There, that's why it wasn't actually filling it. It was still filling it plain color black. So if I go to, it's one thing to select a pattern, it's another thing to enable the pattern mode, right, the fill mode to use that pattern. But now if I click here and fill it, now you'll see that pattern replicate here and replicate in a perfectly symmetrical way. So I'll do that with my brush. I'll clear, and then I'll fill it in here. Oh, I guess not. I need to use that. Oh, that's the stamp. That's not actually filling it until I go to the fill tool and say fill it. There you go. So now it's been filled perfectly. Now there are no seams. Now we have some perfect cloudy content there. That's going to be seamless, except it may not have fit exactly 4 times in there because my brush was a little bit bigger or smaller than the original. It was seamless, but it was not exactly fitting. So I need to make sure that this one is seamless, or I need to be prepared to see a seam. You can test for that, by the way. If you simply move it, if you use the transform filter here to shift it, you can see whether there is a seam, and sure enough, you can see it. Right, so that's a no-no. Let's go and introduce a new image, make seamless. And then that way we have 8% margin transition. And then it looks a little bit odd, but we're probably not going to see this part. It looks a little bit odd here, but at least it's doing what we hope it does, which is to remain seamless. And if we go and transform it, like with the shift tool here, we now no longer find it easy to identify where that transition was. So, in fact, that's also something you can do now to say you like the sky, but you want these bright parts further down near the horizon, or maybe a little bit more to the left, a little bit more to the right, because we'll be looking into this direction by default. Right? So if you want that area where you're looking to be really dark, you want this area, this dark spot, to be moved to the side. So let's go to Shift and shift it around here. There you go. And then another thing you might do is perhaps make it bigger or smaller. So you have a transform with the tiling, right? Transform it, and you can also use that, but now you need to tile it. Enable the tiling, and you can use that to scale it so your clouds get even finer and more detailed, and even rotate it. Right? All of that being tiled, you're not going to see any problems on that sky. You might want to add a little bit of cirrus cloud look to it, like a little bit of a blur or a tear. Let's go and store this. This is a significant cloud. Let's keep it and add a little bit of a motion blur to it. That's an interesting one to use, a bit of motion blur, because then that way it looks a bit more like stuff is happening up in the sky. And then we could do an interactive undo, so we see more of the original, but still a little bit off that transitional blur there due to the high winds. Right, so here we look a bit more like we're looking at Mars. Mars has very strong winds. We could also add a bit more turbulence to that. What might cause the turbulence is in fact the background image or some other image we put there in the swap. So we might use the filter for displacement, the displace by swap, maybe the pool displace, maybe the color twirl, the normal display. There's a couple of ways to displace it. Let's try the pool displace. And of course, it's probably going to be a bit too cranky here, but it's a good one to experiment with. And I can't believe I've been talking for an hour. Well, no, I've been told I talk too much, so I guess no surprise. All right, so we have a nice little displacement happening here as well. Let's say we do want that, but not all of it, right? This is before displacement, this is after. Let's go somewhere in between. That's always a good effect here to trick the eye into having a little bit of both. And so this is going to be my cloud pattern. We can always add some extras, maybe some light diffusion or some mystic vision under the blur, radial blur. Oh, that might be interesting too. Stuff like that. Again, the factor and the quality, play with that and then undo it. Because you don't want the same clouds all over. Some areas should have a little bit more than others, right? So in fact, that's something you can easily do by controlling with a mask, a selection mask, right? So you could, for instance, just paint some blobby regions here with the alpha, paint on alpha, maybe a blobby region. So you say, okay, I'm gonna paint around here, and this area is going to be selected and it's going to be allowed to do something. And that something might be even further filter, selection, blur, a little bit more blur on that. Okay, and so now I want some distortion or some filter effects on here, like this mystic vision, right? But you see it's only happening in that particular range, in that region which the alpha channel has given free rein to do some transforms on. And then when you clear it, deselect it, you now see that there are some streaks and some strange lights and lines in the sky, but not everywhere, just somewhere. And that's what's going to add a bit more interesting detail to it, because now you do have some clouds here that look a bit normal, and then you see others that look very strange. Another thing you can do also is go back to the render plasma noise, right? And combine it with, rather than replacing. I mean, even the replacing is good, but you might want to use a difference mode and perhaps change the size of it here. Perhaps use a less than mode. That's gonna look awesome. Look at that. Look at these clouds. I mean, here we are in outer space. These are nebulous clouds, and it's just beautiful. Click here until you see the one you just totally fall in love with, right? Amore. Let's see what we get here. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna keep it this way. That's my sky, my final answer. And I'm gonna keep that in the brush, right? If you want this to be the sky, you need to put it into the brush. And if you want it to be seamless, remember we did a few more things here. We might want to be careful about it and keep it seamless again. Make it seamless one more time, especially in the x-axis direction. The y-axis, we don't care too much. Not going to see much of that. But this is our image. Let's go and keep it, and let's go and make it a brush. From that stored copy, you can do that, use as brush. Or you could do that directly from the brush menu. Just say pick up the selected, which is everything. The entire image is selected by default, so that will pick it up as a brush. I don't know why we still have the alpha channel showing here. We probably should deselect that, and as a brush, make sure we don't currently have the settings, post effects, enable effects. Oh yeah, we still have the modal alpha because we were earlier painting on alpha with the selection for blobby. So let's disable that, and then that way we are not going to get this strange side effect. But we do have a brush now, and that brush can be stored. I'm going to go and store it. Here's my brush, store and manage a copy. All right, so that's our sky system. That's our sky brush. We can now go back to the original image that we had in the better resolution. This is the sky image fact, you know what? That's a bigger one. I pick that. Let's go brush. Use selected as brush. That's the full size, and I'm gonna nuke this one and store and manage my current brush here. All right, so you can still work with the brightness here too, by the way. You can make it darker skies or very bright, and then even add some tint to it. Hue saturation, hue won't change since it's a black and white, but you can add to it. There's the RGB in that stored copy. Right, so if you want to get rid of the red a little bit, it will get that bluish tint. Okay. In fact, you can add some blue as well. So even the dark parts turn a bit blue. The white is already the brightest it could be, but you have a little bit of a cyan background blue there. I think it's in additive mode. It might be in multiply. No, I think it's in additive. And so we do have also perhaps the saturation, hue saturation. So we have that. We can give it a different hue saturation, brightness, stuff like that. Okay, so that's our brush, and that's the brush we'll use for the sky. We do have, however, a landscape to render, so let's go minimize this one. Here's the landscape. We need to restore the entire image from that, so we go here to create new image, replace the existing, and turn off the preview of the brush, because it's only going to be used. It's in the brush, but it's not going to be used for painting. It's going to be used by Puppy Ray for the sky, the sky map. So we have this. The background needs to receive the color map. That would be this one here with the snow, and that's pretty much done, right? So we can go back to the main image, and we have the elevation map. Texture map is in the swap, and now we are truly ready to render this. And I'm gonna go keep the brush here as a reminder in the minimal form and minimize this. Keep this one here. So these are the three images we're working with. In Puppy Ray, we have an elevation map. That's the main image right here. We have another image, that's the texture map in the swap, in the background there, right? You can see that. And then here is the brush image that we will use as a sky map. Those three images make the essence of Puppy Ray power. So we have transform, Puppy Ray, GPU. And so at this time, when we go to the sky, you can see that we have an extra image at the bottom. That's the custom brush. All right, so let's use that and do a rendering. Ooh, and it is not seamless. I guess I forgot to make it seamless, or I thought I did, but I then picked up the other one or something like that. So either I fix it or I just look away, right? If you don't see no evil, there is no evil. I'm gonna go and keep looking in this direction. I'm gonna go and say perhaps we need it darker or brighter, and then we need the sun to appear somewhere. Can we tell where the sun is? Let's make this a little bit faster with the fast preview. Okay, I think I need to go. Where is the sun? Well, you know what? It'll be easier to find if I turn my head around. Oh, there it is. Okay, that will work too. Let's go move the sun. In fact, one way to find it is to make it significantly oversized. Something like this. There. That's hard to miss. And that's good. Let's make it a little bit smaller now. Let's keep it 55-ish. Okay, let's go and zoom in. What I want to do is really a very strong telephoto lens. And it's kind of sad. We put so much effort into the sky, and at the end of the day, we're not going to look at it. Oh well, you know, that's how it goes sometimes. Let's go scale it up. Let's go bring the fog even farther back. Now we need to make sure we don't see the illumination from the sky. The light, the sun, is actually not a distant light. It's a point light somewhere in the scene. And you could bring it up closer to you, and you would notice that it's actually hovering right over. You can, like a campfire, you can actually bring it down to the point where it's it's touching the ground. So you need to have it farther back than the fog, and or bring the fog in closer. Right? Otherwise, it looks a little bit unnatural. Unless you want to show there's a hint of massive snow caps there too. Right button lets the sun go down, and maybe we'll do a bigger sun here. And there you go, we'll do the sun like this. You need to have the center of the sun above the horizon if you want it to be able to cast shadows and to actually produce lighting on it. Maybe I'm going to raise it a little bit higher here. There you go. And make it brighter. It's probably too far away. I moved it so far away, it's probably not shining very bright here. I can also make the terrain a bit more reflective. That's under the world specular here. Let's give it 55. A nice jump up. And perhaps a bit more, less on the hardness here. Let's give it 6 or 7. So now, yeah, now we see more of that brightness. Some areas getting very bright very suddenly. So that's going to give it a bit of a wet look. And perhaps I can ease out a little bit on my wide angle here. Okay, so that's basically where I want to take it. I'm going to give it a bit of a different angle, different look. You can tell it's a bit slow-ish because I'm very far on that fog. I'm going to bring the fog in closer. That way it doesn't have so many tile replicas to worry about. The rendering will be faster that way. You can do this just temporarily while you work on it, right? And if you don't like it and at the end of the day you want to go back to really a far distant horizon, you can do that for your final render. But just while you're working, you don't need to necessarily see it that far. And so good. So we have this. Now we may want to add the water again. So let's go back to enabling the faster water is the value noise. That one is looks pretty nice. Then there is another one which is the Perlin noise, which looks even better. But it's an opinion, and it might be different from yours. So one thing I'll do is also add transparency. That's the refraction. If you enable a refraction, you'll get it transparent and refractive, of course. And then at that point, you might want to go back to the world settings and add a bit more on the scattering, perhaps, if you want that water to look a little bit deeper and heavier and loaded with particles. Maybe suspension of dirt that got washed down in the rain. Maybe something else we could do also is caustics, enable the caustics. Those add a tremendous amount of visual realism. Let's give it a high level of caustics so we will see some interesting light plays here. You see it better though if you raise the sun a little bit. Right? It depends on the angle at which it hits the water. And so we might do that. We might also have some ground fog. And sometimes the ground fog is a little bit too much. This is nice, I like that. So let's go and work on the waves, the size of the waves. Let's give it maybe 4 feet. I don't know if this is meters or feet. It's tsunami level anyway. So we have a bit more of a disturbed water level here. And we could add multi-frequency, or we could change the wavelength here. If I make it a lower value for the frequency, it's a higher value for the wavelength. So higher wavelengths meaning you see more distance between the waves. So these will be big waves going around. Let's bring it back to 20 something, 23, just for a prime number. And then we also can combine it with a different value for the noise frequency. Let's give it a 17, another prime number. What is it with these prime numbers, Philip? All right, so that's, maybe there is some magic about those, but this looks nicely like disturbed water. And at this point, we're getting ready for final rendering, so I'm going to go make sure we have the shadows enabled. We have the anti-aliasing soon to be enabled, but we need to be at better quality, and we need to add a little bit of rocky bump maps, even though we're not going to see a whole lot of it. Maybe mud bank, maybe a riverbed. It's going to help for some parts that are up close, and certainly if we zoom in, we will start seeing some of those as well. So something like that. Here we definitely will benefit from having some extra bump maps. So let's do that, and then let's try high quality. That will take a little while because it's now 6 levels of anti-aliased rendering. Here you see AA steps is 6, and we see a bit of accumulation of sunlight reflected, and it's going to take a few more seconds to finish the rendering. I'm on a slow system here, guys, just 70 GPU cores. I know you guys are swimming in 2,000 or 3,000 cores with your NVIDIA 1070s or 1080s, and I hate you for that. No, I don't. I don't hate you. You guys bought Dog Waffle or PD Artist or Howler. I love you for that. So let's see. We're going to do a final render here, and that's going to need a little bit more fine detail. So first of all, while we still experiment with that, let's go and uncheck the anti-aliasing. So if we have to wait for an auto refresh, it's not going to be 20 levels of anti-aliasing or 33 or whatever you put in there. I'm going to give it a high number here. Let's go 55. A really high number, 200. A humongous number, 1,000, 2,000, right? And you'll have time to go for lunch and come back, and it may still be rendering. But what we can do for improved quality on the rendering is also reduce the size down to about 0.0014 or 5. Above that, below that, it may not even see any reason to render it for you. Shadow quality, I would give it about 10. Shadow samples, maybe 2, maybe 2 on the pre-filter, maybe 2 on the GI samples. There's a quality. Experiment with some of these and see how that goes. So I'm going to go and set anti-aliasing on. And at this point, I can do a render, and I'm pretty sure that's my final render settings. Go. All right, and so now it's of course waiting time.